Hello.
Hey, Kaitlin.
Happy Friday.
Hey. What a week it has been. So
Yes.
welcome to Making Sense. We're going to attempt to hash through these past week's events. And for those of you who are new, let's just start by introducing Move to Amend. First of all, my name is Millie Harmon. I'm the outreach coordinator for Move to Amend. Move to Amend is a grassroots coalition working to create genuine democracy as we've never had it in the US and fight corporate power. A big focus of our work is the passage of the We the People Amendment, which was recently reintroduced into Congress as HJR 48. The passage of this amendment would correct over 100 years of Supreme Court rulings handing over constitutional rights to corporations by asserting that constitutional rights belong to human beings and that money is not a form of speech to be used to influence our elections and political process. So another big part of our work is ongoing anti-oppression and political education. We know that corporate power is inextricably tied to systems and institutions of oppression. And we, also know that corporate rule most often affects poor and communities of color. Thus, our dedication to anti-racist and anti-oppression education. So with that, I want to turn it over to my co-host here to give us the rundown on how to plug into our campaign.
Yeah, hey everybody. So my name is Kaitlin. I'm Move to Amend's National Director, for those of you that I don't know yet. And you can ask us your questions about Move to Amend or chime in about news that has you riled up anytime during this broadcast. Feel free to also just say hey and where you're tuning in from. No matter which platform you're watching us through, we should be able to get your comments and respond. Lots of times we start off this Friday show that we do rotating who's two people from our national team, board and staff folks, and debrief and make sense of the news. But we thought we'd start this time. There's obviously was some big news this week, and we will get to that. But we're going to start off talking about Move to Amend's 117th campaign. So our campaign to get the 117th Congress to amend, which we've been working on since the beginning of the year. And as Millie said, our We the People Amendment, which makes clear that only human beings have constitutional rights and that money is not speech, was reintroduced in the 117th Congress this month, not last week, but the week before. And so we've been working to try and secure as many co-sponsors in the House as we can, having lots of meetings with offices and reaching out to constituents and asking folks to pressure their Congress member. So we're kind of in this funny space though, because the amendment has been introduced. However, it doesn't look like it has publicly, which is just weird, but I'll explain why. So we have been HJR 48, House Joint Resolution 48 for the last 6 years, for the last 3 Congresses. It's out of the 5 that it's been reintroduced. Actually, this is now the 4th Congress that we've been HJR 48. And so we wanted to keep that number because for organizing purposes at this point, after half a decade, it's what everybody internally knows. We have so many materials that say it. And that was sort of always the intention once we kind of started repeating that number, was to use it over and over again. So Congress allows members to keep the same number of a bill that they introduced last term if it's the same. But it's kind of an unusual process that doesn't get done very often. So basically, the short answer, the way I've been kind of thinking of it and explaining it is, administratively, it's been introduced, but there have not been 47 other amendments introduced yet. There have been 45 as of today. So we need 2 more, and then it'll go on the congress.gov website and be introduced in all the ways. So technically it's been introduced. You can call your representative and ask them to sign on, and that all can happen. However, they might be confused and think that it hasn't been introduced because they all refer to congress.gov as well. And when you go there, there's nothing there. But the amendment language is the same as last time. You can find it on our website at movetoamend.org/amendment. You can find the 117th campaign at movetoamend.org/117 campaign. And that's where you can see who is signed on. We had 51 people signed on. Pramila Jayapal is the lead, so she was first. And then 50 more people signed on as initial co-sponsors with her. And that's the most that we've had in an initial introduction. We'd like to double that this year. That's what we're working on. That's our main work right now. And you can plug in to that. And it's really not very hard work, but it's very important work. And some of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of news this week directly tie back to corporate constitutional rights. And you know, one of the things that we say a lot is pretty much any issue that you're concerned about. If you are concerned about police brutality, well, part of how police have so much power is through their lobbying and financial abilities with police unions and advocacy groups that can pour money into political campaigns, and they do, and then have leverage over local lawmakers. So that relates to the We the People Amendment, because we could get that money out of our politics and move to publicly funded elections so that no one influence group has more sway over our politicians and they're not soliciting private money in order to win office. If you care about the planet, Earth Day this week, you know, and climate change, of course, there's a connection to corporate rule there, right? Fossil fuel corporations. So I'm not going to go through all, well, Medicare for All, list one more, not introduced this week, but introduced last week. And, you know, private healthcare insurance companies making bank off of our health insurance, or our need to have health insurance in order to have healthcare. And that's policy that is set by our government that is heavily influenced by private companies that have a stake in it being like this. So that would also tie back to the We the People Amendment. So no matter what your issue is, this should be your number 2 issue. So please help us contact your rep, no matter who they are. You can see the list of people who we're targeting as our top priorities on that 117 page. But no matter who your rep is, we want to reach out to them. We want to educate them about this issue. We want to get their answer on where they stand. If they're for it, great. We will give them some claps. And if they're against it, then we need to turn this into an issue that voters understand is critical, and they vote accordingly in the next election. So that's what we're doing right now. And hopefully we will get to that goal pretty soon here now that it has been introduced. And hopefully by the time you talk to folks next week on Making Sense, they'll be able to tell you that it's even publicly available that it has been introduced, and we can move on to the next steps.
And as Kaitlin said, you know, it's not hard work. It takes some persistence. Mostly it's just really, you know, reaching out to your representatives and letting them know that this is an issue that their constituents are really behind. And so, you know, constant calls and emails and postcards are what it gets it done.
Yeah, and a lot of times they don't really understand this issue as well as you'd think that they would. And so educating their staff is part of it. But, you know, my experience now doing about a decade of work lobbying Congress has shown me that really it's all about being persistent. That's the thing that matters the most, is being everywhere they go, every town hall, having this question come up. And because we're working on a systemic solution, a long-term solution, something that's not going to pass, you know, immediately, it puts us at a disadvantage, because it's easy to kind of be like, we'll get to that from Congress members, or for it not to be right in front of the public eye, because there are these other issues that feel more immediate and, you know, crushing and pressing. But the reality is that the reason so often why the the situation, whether it's, environmental or community control or workers' rights or whatever it is, we are at a disadvantage is because corporations are able to use our Constitution against us to gain power. And until we address that, we're not really going to be able to systemically solve any of these issues. And these problems are systemic problems. They're problems with the system. They're problems with a system that prioritizes profit and the rights of economic institutions that exist for maximizing profit over the human rights and the environment and the communities where these entities are operating. And it's an upside down, backward system that is killing the planet, killing lots of people needlessly, and making it that people can't have their full lives. And so, we need to do something about it right away. And the more that we, kind of say, well, that's something to take care of later, the longer we prolong these crises.
And what a great opportunity to, unite the different groups that you are working for, whether that's on climate or, Medicare or what have you, to come together on a fundamental change. That's a first step to getting the things done that, all of us want.
So I hope you'll plug in with Move to Amend. You can go to movetoamend.org/volunteer also to sign up, and we'll reach out to you and plug you in. And obviously, another low-key, easy way that you can help is, just sharing the word. So whether it's resharing this broadcast right now, just posting it to your page so more people see it, so more people can plug in with Move to Amend. That takes almost nothing. And pretty much everybody who's listening right now could just do that. And you would help get the word out to more people, because that's our biggest issue. It's not that people don't agree with us. It's not that people don't want to see this. When we have had polling, when we have done ballot initiatives and voters have had an opportunity to weigh in, 70-80% of people, no matter what kind of community we're talking about, no matter how big, how small, red state, blue state, blah, 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 it doesn't matter. People want to see this happen. It's that they don't believe that it's possible, and then they don't know that there are people already working on it. And of course, corporate media bends over backwards to make sure that they don't cover it and that people don't hear about it. So that's why word of mouth and telling people directly is so important. All right. So should we talk about the news this week? It was definitely a really heavy week.
Yeah, undeniably so. And so I guess let's just get into the thick of it. You already mentioned sort of the connection of police brutality to this military industrial complex that is definitely fueled by multinational corporations and big money. So we do have a helpful graphic here that kind of gives you a sense of military spending and where our police spending fits in that. So this is actually showing you worldwide military expenditures. And we all know that the US goes above and beyond everyone else. We can see that. We are way ahead of the game there on military spending, followed by China. And then it comes back to the US on just domestic police funding. So this is actually separated out from our military budget and showing you that we still come in third with our police budgets.
And if you can't see the numbers, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, it's 731, et cetera, $0.7 billion in terms of our military spending in other countries. And then the police amount is, over $118 billion. But just the graph really is the point. Like, the exact numbers don't matter that much. So sorry, it's a little bit blurry probably on your screen, but the gist of it being that if we were, if there was another country, they would have a very large military, a larger military than India. But really what that military is doing is policing the US public. And we also know, I don't have the stats in front of me, but the reality is that police, rarely are able to actually catch murderers. They rarely address successfully, and there's very little conviction of rapists. I mean, violent crime, which is what we think of like why we need the police, mostly goes unsolved. Even property crime largely goes unsolved in terms of the amount of this money and what is it going to do. We do know things like there have only been 3 days so far this year that police have not killed somebody. 319 people have been killed. And I'm sure that everyone has heard by now that during the Chauvin trial, 64 people, and even as the verdict was being read, a 16-year-old was killed. A girl, child was killed by police when she had called the police because she felt in danger. So, it's been disheartening to see that the entire conversation is not clearly understanding that this institution is a total failure. It's an absolute failure by any metric, and it's tremendously expensive financially. And then obviously the cost of human life is tremendously expensive. And, it could go without saying, but it needs to be said that the reason why it continues is because that cost of human life comes at the expense of people of color and poor people and mentally ill people. For the most part, that's who's disproportionately murdered by police. And so we as a society are not addressing this because we have not taken on the challenge of making clear that in our law and in our policy and in our society and the way that we operate, that Black people matter as much as white people. That's not true under the law. And so here we are. And that was, to me, that was obviously, this is the biggest news of the week, and we couldn't not talk about it and spend some time on it and just make clear where Move to Amend stands on this, and that we'll continue to work. And at this point, people who are working to defund the police, people who are working to abolish the police are the people that we need to support in terms of police reform. That's where this.
And I want to let's go back to this idea of reform and accountability within the system. And there's been a lot of, liberal celebration around the charges that were brought on Derek Chauvin and during that time. But this is performative. This is very much a handout given to us to say, oh, well, the system can work. See? But really, when we examine the numbers, and you gave us some statistics for this year, but last year, there were only 18 days in 2020 that nobody was killed. 1,100 people were killed by police in 2020, and only 16 of those cases resulted in charges. So this is not the reality. It is not the reality that a cop gets charged for the murder of a Black man when they kill them in the street. This is, we are given an instance to subdue us. And please, 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 let's not let it do that. And I think that this is a good opportunity to reflect on the history of policing and why fundamentally, this is an institution set up to be racist. Alfonso, if you would share in the comments, this great Critical Resistance provides a policing timeline that's really good to dig in deep. But the police as we know it, can be traced back to the time of slavery. And the first versions of our modern police forces were slave patrols. It was based on the premise that Black people are property and need to be patrolled by police. And then quickly after slavery ended, policing evolved as a response to, potential and emerging Black political power. Police were used to uphold segregation and Jim Crow laws and to keep people oppressed.
Well, and also let's point out that the KKK was basically in charge of police departments all over the place, not just in the South. So it was, overtly and covertly terrorizing people was the business of the police during Jim Crow.
And then when we look in sort of deeper to this, then we move into the prison industrial complex. And what was the foundation of prisons themselves? It was to re-enslave folks who were loose, and then slave labor comes back into play when we have people institutionalized doing forced labor, which is still very much a reality today.
Oftentimes working for private corporations so that private corporations can say that their products are US made, but still pay people, not even close to a living wage because people are incarcerated who are their workers.
And when we talk about police, we should also be thinking about ICE and immigration and the huge influence that private prisons have on actually creating immigration law. I mean, I live in Arizona. We saw 1070. It was paid for and brought to you by private prisons, which was a completely blatantly racist policy where people can be stopped based on their skin color and asked for documentation.
So we can't, I know that there was certainly a sigh of relief that was breathed because it wasn't a sure thing. It wasn't a sure thing that somebody, that George Floyd being murdered incredibly violently and cruelly in front of everyone to see. There was no guarantee that Derek Chauvin was actually going to be found guilty. In fact, it seemed like, based on all of our life experience so far, that was a bit of a long shot. So, yes, I was relieved at the answer, but a lot of that was because they didn't want to see riots happen in this country over the next several months. And in fact, Axios tweeted yesterday or the day before that privately top policymakers for Republicans and Democrats in DC acknowledged that now that he has been found guilty, they feel like they can put, police reform, let alone like what needs to happen with police, but even addressing police brutality at all can go on the back burner again. And that's what they were saying immediately after this trial. And so that's what they're going to do unless we make sure that this doesn't get dropped, and that this doesn't go, and that we don't go away and our demands don't go away. And again, that we support the people who are calling for the systemic change. And the systemic change is to abolish this institution, which, as Millie said, was created in order to police Black people who were enslaved and then Black people who were liberated, but still, treated as less than human beings in this country. And that's our roots. And the little shifts along the way to adapt to changing society conditions have largely been untouched by police because they have qualified immunity, and so they are outside the bounds of any laws that we pass for the rest of us. And that is the way of the world, and that is what police expect. That is what police are used to. I mean, the expression on Derek Chauvin's face showed that he was clearly very shocked that he actually was found guilty. And so, that's, and then, countless videos just from this week of, police mistreating people, police killing people, police rubbing it in people's face, their power. This is not an institution that can be reformed with a couple new people swapped in. It's rotten to its core. And we have a responsibility whenever there's anything like that. And there are lots of areas like this at this point. But part of what Move to Amend has always been about is let's say the truths that need to be said, even if we don't want to hear them, because dealing with the ramifications is scary or large or, a little bit overwhelming. Let's behave like democratic people, which means that the power is supposed to be in our hands and we're responsible for what society is doing. And so if our society is fucked up and not working, that's on us to figure out how to change it.
And, I think we also should mention there's been a lot of liberal Democrat sort of glorification over this situation. and some really disgusting remarks. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the clips of Pelosi, thanking George Floyd for sacrificing his life. It's not a sacrifice. He didn't choose to be murdered by the police state to make a statement. This is really disgusting. When we start to use when they start to use these situations to, bolster their own weird agenda.
And a lot of people have sort of been like, oh, well, yeah, Pelosi, she's kind of out there. Pelosi is one of the top spokespeople for the party that is in charge of our country. So she's not just somebody who you can kind of say, that's the perspective of leadership is, I mean, honestly, I had to turn that video off. I couldn't even listen to it when she started thanking him for calling out to his mother. It's like, what kind of psychotic out there take is this on the situation? Obviously, you're not even really able to grok the full humanity of George Floyd if that's how you would approach a statement to the country after this, gutting whole experience of this last year, and the fact that everyone is talking about this issue that we should have been talking about for a very long time, but now that we are, like, this is still what you're adding to the conversation. It was unbelievable.
No, absolutely. So again, I sort of, to continue in this vein, but reflect back on something that happened this past week and me and Kaitlin are both from Northern California, or have lived there, set down some serious roots. And so 420 happened. This sort of like, however this got created, this history around with pot culture celebration on this day. And, as we've seen, state after state are legalizing this substance. But I think it's important, as, people are happily celebrating and smoking legal joints in the street, that the criminalization of drugs and the war on drugs was very, very, very intentionally created to target Black and brown people. And I have this, this well-known quote from Nixon's former domestic policy advisor, which says, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black people, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." So a lot is to be said about people still serving time, and majoritively Black and brown people for cannabis arrests.
Meanwhile, white people and corporations increasingly are starting to rake in the profits of this drug being legalized. And then the behavior that people are doing now of, freely exercising, there are still people who are in jail for that same behavior. And it's overwhelmingly disproportionately Black people and Latino people who are in jail as a result of cannabis criminalization.
And a huge piece of that was mandatory minimums. And I want to talk now a bit on actually Biden's continuation on Trump era's mandatory minimum on fentanyl-based products, which of course we don't want in our communities. But this disproportionately targets poor, communities of color who have been pushed to Black market because we don't have an economy that's providing jobs. And it's throwing folks in jail rather than going to the pharmaceutical corporations producing these harmful drugs and putting them into our communities.
Let's, Alicia, it looks like you're your comment got cut off, and I'm not sure if people can see it very large, so I'll just read it real quick here because it sounds like something that people might want to be interested in. If you could post another link, or post another comment with the link, then we could share that too. But Alicia says, hashtag 420, hi, I'm hosting conversation on structural racism and the silent whip and would like to invite you all to the conversation. Please join this Sunday, 5 o'clock. Not sure what time zone that is. So if you could clarify that too. We are removing symbolism of hate. Why not remove the silent violence of structural hateful racism labels? Aaron Waters of the Afro-Socialist Political Education will talk with me as we discuss unmasking from structural racism, a critique of who we are, how we became, and where we want to be. So yeah, if you could include the link, we'd be happy to share that with folks. And thank you for the invitation.
And she had another comment, which I think is really important too. I want heroin and fentanyl in my community. And the issue is the criminalization. When we start to actually profit off of people being incarcerated because they choose to do something with their body is outrageous. And again, when rich people, it's fine for them to, partake as they will, really, without any consequences.
Yeah, I mean, any society that installs a profit motive for incarcerating people, same thing with a profit motive for whether or not to heal people and give them healthcare, that it's a sick and not functional society, basically a failed society that is going to end up exactly where we are now, where people don't get the care that they need and people are in prison who shouldn't be, because somebody's making money on both. So one thing that I learned about just yesterday, which was very alarming and surprising, and want to keep looking into this more, something I hadn't heard anything about, just a Yahoo News article crossed my Twitter timeline, which, is not necessarily where I go for like breaking, government accountability news. But apparently the U.S. Postal Service has been running a covert operations program that monitors American social media posts. So not even looking at people's mail, which is outrageous. And it's definitely a practice that the Postal Service has engaged in, at least we know in the past, and who knows right now. But actually having a law enforcement arm So the law enforcement arm of the U.S. Postal Service has been quietly running a program that tracks and collects American social media posts, including those about planned protests, according to this document that was obtained by Yahoo News. And the details of the surveillance effort known as ICOP, Internet Covert Operations Program. What?
Somebody was just like getting off with that. They're like, I'm going to sneak this in and nobody's going to notice. I thought the post office was broke.
Yeah, I know. The post office is broke.
They got,
and maybe this is part of why. So the work involves having analysts trawl through social media sites to look for what the document describes as inflammatory, quote, postings, and then shares that information with other government agencies. And what this bulletin that Yahoo News found was specifically related to monitoring activity around right-wing protests on March 20th, which I didn't know was a thing. And so it all talks about that's who they've been targeting because this was just this one bulletin. But, immediately my spidey sense goes off like, well, wait a minute, what else are they tracking for? For example, when you look at what the police presence was when Black Lives Matter had a protest in Washington, D.C. last year versus in January when there was a takeover of the U.S. Capitol by right-wing extremists. And it doesn't take much to imagine that right-wing protesters are not the only ones who are being monitored by this secret police force of the post office.
Yeah,
it makes me think of Seinfeld and Newman, which is maybe not a good joke, and maybe people who are younger wouldn't even get it. Does anybody remember Seinfeld? But anyway, it's not funny. It's terrifying, actually. But you kind of have to joke about it because what else can you do?
But how the hell does this body that is supposed to be delivering my packages end up surveilling my moves on social media? And like you said, please, it's just the right wing they're monitoring. That's what Democrats say to make us all sit easy. Like, that is just not possible.
Yeah. So who knew that the post office even had this secret law enforcement operation, let alone that and it just like how the connection is made. Is it just like because that's where you wouldn't look? I mean, why is this, not that it would be okay, but like, why is this not an arm of the FBI? What does this have to do with the post office to be looking on Facebook? It doesn't make any sense. So that's why I'm saying I will be looking into this more. I just found this out yesterday when this article came out. Seemed like a surprise to everyone that I was talking to about it.
So hi to the U.S. Postal Surveillance Union. You know they're tuning in. Okay, well let's talk a little bit about Earth Day. We also had the introduction of the Green New Deal. So
honestly, Earth Day just makes me sad at this point. It's just it's very sad. It's like the biggest tragedy we have.
Well, that's when, all the fossil fuel companies come out and plant trees. It's a very sort of, well, let's talk greenwashing then, I guess, because why we just get all these feels of love for the planet from every company around us. We get all of these like ideas in our head that like we can save the planet on this one day, and seems very short-sighted.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the intention of Earth Day back when, was good. It was people who recognized that the way that we behave as a species on this Earth was, to the detriment of the Earth and other species and ultimately ourselves, right? And I remember, not the first Earth Day, but early on in that, being a kid and having Earth Day. And then, very quickly people saying like, well, Earth Day should be every day, blah, 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 that. But, I really think of Earth Day and greenwashing in general as that's corporate capitalism responding to something, of people recognizing, all of this plastic, all of this waste, the fact that, we don't recycle, but then it's like everything that you look at, okay, we should recycle. Well, turns out recycling isn't really real. It's bogus. Most of the time, recycling is just shipped over to China. Until recently, they've said, we don't want your freaking trash. You guys keep it. There's almost no, the number of things that get actually recycled that are purported to be recyclable or recycled is a fraction. And so much of what corporate capitalism is best at is selling us back our own destruction and our own powerlessness and making us feel like we're doing something when in fact the tables haven't turned at all. The power hasn't shifted at all. They're still on top and they're still making money. So now we have
good at convincing us to take actions like we're going to save the world. Like, okay, banning straws in my county is going to really get at the heart of it. But we are encouraged to think in these ways, like these are the things, but we're just fitting inside of the system with those kind of limited changes.
Right. And deflecting the true culprits of the problem. I mean, yes, on one hand, everything that we are all doing is what is doing this. But on the other hand, fossil fuel companies knew about climate change 30, 40 years ago and made sure to bury that, made sure to divert people to other places and, putting it on consumers and even turning us into consumers. We're not friggin' consumers. We are human beings that, are trying to live in society in this world. And the whole mindset of we are consumers and the way that we can make change, the way that we can assert our power is to buy our way to one lifestyle or another is, that whole paradigm is wrong. It means that the people with the money are the ones who are able to make the most influence. It means that changing things on a structural level isn't even part of the conversation. People don't even imagine how those kinds of changes would be made. It means that little kids who want to do good in the world get into their minds that the way that they're going to do that is they're going to be a business owner and be rich. And then they can actually assert power and make change. And until you can do that, then you can't do anything.
And I find extreme irony in the fact that it is private industry that has stripped, our globe of resources for profit. Yet it is the private industry that, at least in the US, we are looking to solve these problems. They're hosting this La Climate Summit at the White House, and two of the featured speakers are Mike Bloomberg and Bill Gates. So when we put corporations on a pedestal to solve the problems such as, climate, we're really, really tripping ourselves up and kidding.
Yeah, the problems that they created and that definitely do not want to talk about in those terms. It's like saying pharmaceutical companies should be the ones to address the opioid crisis, when actually what it was is a conspiracy against all of us to make money. And that's exactly what climate change is. It was a conspiracy by fossil fuel companies to make money, and knowing that they weren't going to be here when the shit hit the fan, and everybody else later would deal with it. And that's where we are now. And the fact that we can't even tell that, we can't even have that be the starting point, is what makes me really worried, that, terrified that we're not going to be able to make the change that we need to. And if anything has been shown to us through COVID, it is that if we wanted to, we could actually turn things on a dime. I mean, obviously COVID didn't actually work, because at the end of the day, the powers that be decided they didn't want to turn things on a dime. And so, but there was a moment where everybody was looking around and realizing, okay, do I have to make drastic changes in my life in order to survive? And willing to do that, and why is that not the conversation that is happening around climate change? Why is that not what is coming from our leaders in Washington, D.C. around climate change? It's always this, like, we'll get there someday, maybe, and we'll join some treaty and then hope that the numbers get better in terms of
treaties and bullshit goals. People are talking a lot about net zero emissions and carbon neutrality. And I really want to pull that apart as the gross non-solution that it is, because it comes straight from the mouths of corporate babes. This is offsetting carbon usage. This is allowing companies to continue what they're doing exactly and buy nature and preserved land to offset their carbon. What this is going to result in is huge land grabs from indigenous communities that actually have the most biodiversity preserved to count as this carbon sequestering. It's a really, really gross sort of manipulation of the public to say that that is a meaningful goal, to save anything but continued business.
So crazily enough, where we find ourselves is that, like, the first step of action is just admitting how bad it is, admitting what's really going on here. And that's what we're doing today. And right now, the Green New Deal was introduced this week too. But what I want to see is, lawmakers disrupting their own proceedings for climate change. I want to see, lawmakers getting in each other's, in their opponents' faces, and taking political risks for climate change. At this point, those are the only leaders that I'm willing to pay any attention to. And anybody who isn't doing that, anybody who's kind of over on the side proposing policies that are vague and or not big enough, or not clear enough in terms of the dire threat are clowns and jokes. And we need to be done with them. We need to be done with them, and then we need to take their place.
And they have some like easy shit to do in front of them. Like, period, let's just stop subsidies. Like, within this pandemic, we've seen $15.2 billion in subsidies to fossil fuel companies in direct pandemic relief. And you tell me we can't afford Medicare for all? Tell me you can't afford student debt relief? And then they come back around and the fossil fuel industry spent $111 million on lobbying, $139 million in political contributions. Please, like, such an easy move.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yes, Earth Day opportunity to talk about this, but at this point with climate change, and what we know about it, this should be the conversation every day. And really, Earth Day felt like it was just an opportunity for businesses to tell you, and it's like, it's not even some of their fault. Like, some of this is businesses that are trying to, be like, okay, I operate in this world. How do I do it well? But, that's how screwed we are, is that we cannot even imagine actually asserting power in a way that is powerful. And so, it's these tiny little steps, these token measures, and kind of pathetic pleas to do something when, it really should be Mayday situation, and there should be nothing else that we're talking about. And that it all needs to be done in a way that also dismantles capitalism, dismantles systemic racism, and ends colonialism. Like, where would we get the money? Oh, I don't know. How about that $730 billion graph that we showed you at the beginning of this show, right? There's plenty of resources for this. No problem. We do not need to have our military all over the world as the largest polluter in the world. The US military is responsible for more carbon emissions in the environment than any country, than any business, than any person, for sure. It is not about what kind of car you drive. It is about the fact that our tax dollars are paying for the absolute poisoning of the planet in the name of conquest and colonialism. And if we just eliminate that, we would be well on our way to having what we need to solve these problems in a way that doesn't just reinforce the same status quo and violence that that our current system is steeped in.
So I want to take another moment to sort of plug our proposed 28th Amendment, the We the People Amendment, HJR 48, because in terms of actually passing any meaningful legislation to address the climate crisis, to address the loss of diversity on our planet, is that we can't do anything if we still have the current state of corporations having constitutional rights. Because when communities go to protect themselves, to pass anti-fracking resolutions, to ban new infrastructure in wetland areas, they constantly come up against giant corporations in court with the same rights as people, only with huge amounts of money and power. So it is a first step to anything such as the Green New Deal that we have to strip them of these, constitutional rights that, again, we said have come to them through very activist Supreme Court rulings, which we're starting to see very, very clearly. So the Supreme Court has a lot of ability to push forward agendas that they want.
And so this is how it works, right? We've been talking about how we basically, the people who are in leadership in Congress, the people who are in national leadership in this country have another agenda. They do not have democracy as the agenda. They do not have addressing the climate change or protecting the environment or ending racism as their agenda. That's not their agenda. They don't work for people who want to see that be the world. So they have a different agenda. So and Alicia, thank you for the compliment running for Congress. But honestly, I don't know that makes any sense, because look at what has happened to the people like us who have run for Congress and who are there now and who are, as we speak, being co-opted and manipulated into serving the larger corporate capitalist interests that run this country. And that's the reality of where we are right now. So I don't think that we should take our best and most effective or well-spoken or visionary people and funnel them into that funnel. What we need is for local leadership at the local level, for communities to stand up and say, not here, not now, not on our watch, not where we live. And we will stop it elsewhere too, because obviously this cannot be some sort of NIMBY thing where it's like, we're well organized and so you can't harm us, but why don't you just go next door to our poor neighbors and take it to them, right? So there has to be solidarity with it as well. But right now, what we have is our Constitution gets used against communities that do that, communities that are able to organize, that do have leaders who are willing to stand up and fight for them, whether it's around worker rights or human rights or environmental rights. And they get slapped down legally and told, you don't have that authority because you've violated the constitutional rights of corporations. And so it doesn't happen. If it does happen, they get sued and they have to pay a lot of money for the legal fees for companies that have fought them, or it doesn't happen in the first place because the lawyers of those communities say, that's not on the table. You're not going to be able to do that. So we need people to do it. We need communities and people to do it anyway. We need them to basically perform community direct action, civil disobedience on a local level around these kinds of policies. But we also need to change it so that our Constitution is not used against these communities, so that we have the ability to move forward with the world that we need. And so that's why we work on the We the People Amendment. And are we going to be able to get Congress to do it? I don't know, right? But so many people do not even understand that the legal system makes democracy impossible. So if we don't start from that place in figuring out what the heck we're going to do about this, then we're delusional. We're not actually mounting a fight for justice and saving the planet that is going to get us where we need to go, because we're delusional about what the problem is.
Absolutely.
I
a little bit of positivity and inspiration. And, sometimes it's really like you're scraping the barrel to get these moments. But since we did take so much time to talk about police abolition and the movement to defund, I think that we want to talk a little bit about the successes that have come from communities taking it on themselves to defund and reinvest in their communities. And it actually is now at over 20 major cities, such as Minneapolis and LA and Portland, that have moved tremendous amounts of money from their police budget into community services such as housing and education and things that mental health, things that are actually critical to the well-being and safety. And, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like when we look at wealthy communities with the lowest rates of policing, their needs are served on a very fundamental level. They're fed, they're housed, they're educated, their youth are engaged in activities. There is, so I don't think that we need to, say it again and again, but again, we are looking to alternatives. We need to start creating local avenues, and certainly exploring police budgets and how that money can be moved into community programs is something being done successfully.
You saying that, Millie, kind of reminds me of the theory of social change that we used to operate from and educate from at Democracy Unlimited, which was the group that I worked with before Move to Amend, and the organization that kind of anchored Move to Amend when it was first formed, that was a local community. And from our perspective, the way that you make change is you resist change and you resist harms that are happening to you and your people where they are. But in doing that, you have to try and think about how to build the most power possible. So you resist the harm, but you do that in a way that builds power. And when you're, deciding on tactics and strategies, you kind of run it through that filter of like, well, is this going to build power? If so, yes, okay. But if not as much as this other thing, then we should do this other thing. But then you also have to build alternatives. You have to build alternatives so that people can see that there is a different way and that their needs can be met, and not rely on the system that is actually, unfair and oppressive. And then you also have to shift the culture. And that's the biggest problem that I think that we have. And so much of what, we're trying to get more clear at Move to Amend is like, yes, we have this amendment, this policy that is really important that needs to happen, and this change to the law. But the reason why we're even in a situation where we would need this amendment is because our country is founded on the idea that property is more important than human life. Property is more important than the ecology of the planet. And so here we are with property that is corporations having more rights under the law than human beings actually have. And at the same time, running in parallel to that story is the story of all of the people who are not fully recognized as human beings in all kinds of ways in this country either. And that's still an ongoing battle. And so we have to change the culture to say that it doesn't have to be this way, that this is not the way the world has to operate. The foundational premise of this country is not one of liberation. It is one of giving greedy people the ability to manipulate the rest of us. And that's not a country that I want to, say any pledges for or, fight anybody else to defend, et cetera, et cetera. And until we actually say that and own that, and then figure out what we're going to do about that so that we can be a country that would be worth defending, then, we're going to continue to be in sideshow battles.
No, absolutely. And I guess I want to underline once more that Move to Amend's strategy is multi-pronged. Yes, we have a bill in Congress. Yes, we work within the system, but we are also movement builders. We have, over the last 10 years, been working at a grassroots level to have conversations, to educate about the implications of corporate power. And that is where we have built our power, is within those community conversations, within passing local measures, state initiatives. So please do sign the petition if you have not already. And we also check out our current campaign. As Kaitlin mentioned earlier, Move to Amend /117 campaign. This is how you can plug in to the current work being done to get as many House co-sponsors as we can in this Congress. I also want to say we are grassroots. We are politically independent because we don't take large foundation funding. We're not beholden to wealthy donors to make our decisions for us. We are people driven. And to do that, we rely on individuals to fund us. Our average donation is around $40. So if you are able, please, please, please consider financially contributing. The best way, if you can, is to become a monthly donor. This is how we are able to look forward, plan our campaigns, and correctly budget, is when we can depend on that constant income from sustainers.
And it's the way that those of us, who don't have a lot of money can contribute in a very significant way. So if everybody pitches in $5 a month, $10 a month, that's not going to break most of our banks, but it is going to add up and make it so that we can all, ensure that Move to Amend is here to do this work for as long as it takes in whatever ways it needs to be done. So that's an hour. It's been great that folks have weighed in on the conversation as we've gone. We maybe, if there are any questions that people have been kind of holding because we've been talking about other stuff, we can maybe, before we sign off, just give you the opportunity if anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comments. And just a couple things coming up. Next week, we will be doing our monthly live report, which is kind of similar to this in terms of the format, but it's a little bit more focused on Move to Amend and corporate rule news and analysis rather than a little more off the cuff like this is. And we're changing up the format of that. Normally, I have been doing our live report solo, but I'm really happy that some of my colleagues are going to be rotating in and helping with that so that you'll be hearing from more voices. So that'll be next Wednesday. And we also have this Making Sense that we do for now every Friday. So you can tune in next week and meet some other folks from the national team. And then on Saturday next week, so this is not a Move to Amend project, but I am going to announce it here. Millie and I are both involved in a podcast that we're doing under the umbrella of Democracy Unlimited, which I had mentioned before, which has still been the educational arm of Move to Amend. And that organization hasn't had an opportunity to do very much because we've really just been focusing on the policy work of the We the People Amendment. But we're looking to shift that around in the next few years and change the directions. And so one of the first things that we're going to do is a new podcast. It's called Agitated Podcast. And it'll be a different flavor than Move to Amend. And, if you're relatively happy and you feel as though things just sort of started to go wrong, maybe when Citizens United happened or when Donald Trump became president, I would encourage you to listen to Agitated, but also prepare to be agitated a little bit from the conversation, because this is where we want to talk more bluntly about really what our take is on how we got into this mess, what the mess is that we're in. And we want to use agitated, not a lot of times people think like agitated and use that synonymously with irritated, which I do too. But the show is not called Irritated. It's called Agitated in the spirit of agitators, people who shake things up, people who are shook up, and that shake up that drives people to move towards action. And so check out the very first episode of Agitated Podcast on May Day. And if you go to Agitated Podcast on Facebook or Twitter, or we don't have a YouTube channel, but we're Instagram, that's where you can find us. And then also agitatedpodcast.com. And it looks like we do have, I love what Paul said here, so I want to put it up on the screen. Thanks for that, Paul. And then a question, what's the movement education program all about?
Thanks, Craig. That was really good prompt here. As we've talked about a lot in this episode of Making Sense, anti-racist and anti-oppression education is fundamentally tied to our work at Move to Amend. This is actually the third iteration of our movement education program, but it is a wonderful package of resources that you can move through as an individual or with a group, looking at movement history, what worked, what didn't, different co-optations that have happened. Also fundamentally exploring the institutional racism and how that has continued throughout history in today, and how that actually is reflected in this corporate rule culture that is all around us.
And how it affects our ability to organize effectively and build power together or not. How institutionalized racism is the most sharp and effective tool of the elite to divide and conquer, and how we unwittingly fall into that in the organizing work that we do, and how to kind of step back and be able to see that culture is not neutral, and that we each bring culture to the table when we get involved in a group. And if we're not intentional about that culture, then probably we are going to recreate and play out toxic patterns, because it's, you know, it's in the air we breathe, it's in the water, it's everywhere around us, and we are not immune from being affected by that. Even if we, you know, have read some books and are, you know, groovy and enlightened, it's an ongoing process that we have to commit to all the time. And in fact, that's so much of the work. And so how to build a group that can do that together and bump up against, you know, missteps and violations of trust or misunderstandings, and work through them in a way that doesn't undermine people's humanity, is so important. And, you know, there's no one right way to do that, but unless you create the space for all of that to come up and be dealt with in a way that is accountable, then you're probably going to end up with, you know, a group that is homogeneous and not really dealing with anything real, and not very capable of fighting together in a way that's effective.
So again, this resource is wonderful opportunity to learn about history and reflect your own experiences, but also to provide you and your group with tools to actually build power within your community and organize in solidarity with other groups. So please, please, please check it out, movetoamend.org/education.
All right, I'll put the link in there too, so that everybody can just click right on it. So thanks for tuning in with us. Unless there's anything else that you have to add, Millie, I think that we can wish everyone a happy Friday and a good weekend, and do something that makes you feel like a full human, whatever that is.
Spend some time doing something restorative. That's a nice note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thanks, Alfonso, as always, for being the producer of this show and making it possible for us to do this. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Alfonso. Bye, everybody.